Welcome to Success Authorities Conversation Street with Leadership Authority Peter Beaumont and with Business Culture Authority Ronn Lehmann and me, Linda Ruhland, Success Authorities founder.
I think we all know what scenario planning is, but it hit me square in the eyes during COVID when several of my clients who were in manufacturing stroke construction, one of them was facing potential bankruptcy if the cash flow completely dried up. And it's before the loans started to come out, the SBA loans, before we started to learn about those. And they were really concerned. So I stopped a whole EOS leadership meeting and said, all right, actually, we got to the issues list. And I said, your number one issue before we go through any of these others is your cash flow, and you're worried about bankruptcy, and it's going to cloud your judgment on any of these other issues we need to go through. So let's just get it out in the open and let's look at the scenarios that can happen, right? What's the worst possible scenario that could happen to your business? And so they started listing it. So I started writing it down on the board. I'm like, we don't get, the supply chain dries out, we can't get the goods, and they went through a whole litany of stuff. We can get the goods, but the price goes through the roof, so we have to, and so we started going through that, as I said, a whole a virtual shopping list of things that could happen. And then I stopped and said, okay, what are the worst of those, which could actually destroy your business? And so we did that. And then I said, okay, so what can we do, given this is a scenario, what do we do about preventing it happening? Or if it does happen, what do we do? What can we do? And it was like, well, I don't think we can do anything. Of course you can. You're planning for a potential catastrophe is what you're telling me. Therefore, what can we do to prevent it? How can we secure stuff now? How can we keep the prices down? And I said, for every one of these, there's a how, what can we do about it? And they went, you're right. I said, so let me start a whole new fresh list. What can we do about these things to prevent the worst scenario? And so we started listing those. And it was like, I likened it to going into a doctor's. And, when we used to go into doctors before we had specialists, and now we just miss them out. But before, when we did have doctors that we went to, you would walk into the surgery, tell them what the symptoms were. They would magically tell you what it is, and you'd prescribe you something, and you'd walk out feeling as if you'd been cured magically. Nothing had changed, but you actually knew what was wrong with you. And that is a fundamental thing, I think, with all of us as humans. It's the thing that we fear most is the lack of understanding what's going on or what the future holds, maybe. So I think that's our greatest fear. As soon as we find out, we can deal with it, right? I've got very close to home. Somebody who works for me, a baby got diagnosed with not a very, I forget the terminology now, but it is where the brain has not put together all of the nerves and everything. They're slightly exposed, and if that baby is born, first of all they can do surgery, but secondly, if the baby's born, there's a lifespan that could be not go beyond 40. They may not be able to walk properly, effectively. So she had a scan a week ago, was told that this was possible. And then, of course, there's all sorts of permutations that can happen. So she went through a dreadful time. Now, I saw her yesterday, she came into work. She's carrying a baby. She's going to go full term, maybe bed rest. But she knows now what she's facing. And she and her husband, so that all of the worry and concern from a week ago, she's still facing a huge uphill task, but she knows what that task is. So It was almost magical with these companies when you went, hey, here's the worst scenario, and here's what we can do about it. It was like prescribing something, right? And so, and then we worked back and said, all right, that's worst. Best is probably where we are. It's probably somewhere in the middle too. What are we going to do about that? And what could those things be? And so we ended up with, I think we ended up with 3 possible scenarios and what we should do in the event that those occurred. So that's a long dissertation with a couple of things in there. But that to me is something that we've stopped doing. And I suggest to clients now, and they're like, no, don't need to do it. Everything's fine. So we stopped doing it at a time when we should be doing it, because what it taught me is you should be doing scenario planning whether you've got a crisis or not, because as sure as hell, we all know that any plan, as I think famous general said, does not survive the first action right in a war. And so it's the same with business. Whatever plan you got, you have to evolve it. But what do you evolve it to if you don't have a set of scenarios that you can fall back on? But that's really the synopsis of why I think scenario planning should be used much more than it is in companies. Yeah.
I have two thoughts on what, the fear part, I think, is real. And also with the lack of information, we make up our own, and it's always catastrophic. And that takes our energy, and that energy is what we need to be creative and innovative. When your house is burning, it's really too late to think about fire prevention and getting insurance. And then you have to think about, and it becomes real focused about get out of the house, or what should we have saved? And if you don't, but when you do it when things are going great, I think it's easier it's hard to see the need for it. But if you can get to that point, you tend to be much more creative around what could happen. And in connection with that, I saw an interview with Neil Armstrong once after the Apollo 13 thing. And he said, we trained for every possible problem we could think of.
Yeah.
I mean, we drilled and practiced, and what are we going to do about this? And they did all this catastrophe planning. And he said, and then when the thing happened, well, we didn't think of that. He said, but we knew how to problem solve because we practiced all those other things. So we were able, as a team, to figure out how to do something about it, even though we hadn't, that one thing happened. And I think with all the change that happens with companies and chaos, we can do our best effort to think about what could happen. And it's going to be something slightly different, but we will be more prepared, as you said, Peter, than if we wait till, when the cash dries up, it's a little late. Now you've limited your choices at that point.
I think that's a really good point, and I'm going to work that into it. Thank you for the idea. Work that into the article, because I think you're right. It's the practice of the fact that you go through this that really, it's like sports people practicing. They don't just turn it on in a game. That bicycle kick, that you saw, that was incredible. They've practiced that over 150,000 times over the last 3 years, and it looks so simple in the game. It's because the mind drives the muscle, and it's intuitive, right? It doesn't just happen like that. And it's the same with business. You're absolutely right. That's a really good point. By the way, it makes me, you brought another point up that I really think was interesting, that we should work back into your article, which is, a chapter, which is the in the absence, so you said something very clear, in the absence of people being told or communicating clearly, they make their own shit up, that technical word. And so that could be in your example, by the way, of when he thinks he's communicated again and again. I had an example the other day. We have, without going into a really lengthy story, we've just had a guy that's been brought on by one of the two manufacturers. 95% of what we sell at the company I work with is basically from two companies, one Denmark, one Belgium. And one of the companies has just brought in a guy to be customer services based in Carolina. And we had him in training this week to learn about the product and stuff. And so the rumors were going around the office because we hadn't said anything clearly. I thought the owner had made it clear. I really did, because we talked about it and he told everybody why this guy was coming in. Now there's a guy who really would like to do the operations director's job. He thinks this guy's coming in and we haven't told him the truth and he's going to take the operations job. Because we didn't communicate. We thought we communicated clearly. So in the absence of clear communication, people make shit up, right?
Yeah, and it's almost always bad.
And it's bad. And so fortunately, somebody tipped me off in the organization in a one-on-one. And so in an ops meeting, without calling her or him out, saying, by the way, I just want to clarify why this guy's here. You know, there's, I thought we clarified, but clearly we haven't, because a couple of people have come to me and asked me clarifying questions. I just want to let you guys know, because this is our ops, you know, our 10 meeting. This guy's not coming to take over operations. He's clearly customer services, and he's not coming here. He's going to be based where he lives in Carolina. So I just want to clarify that. Just in case got any questions, let me know. And then moved on. But I had to do that because I thought we had, but we hadn't clearly communicated. So I just think that's a piece that could go into your chapter. But, yeah.
And sometimes it's because something happened in the past where somebody said one thing and then something else happens. So now they've got that, muscle memory of, and then it really connects too with trust. It's like, if I trust your intention and you say, this guy's coming on, I'm going to not jump right to it's a lie. Or if I didn't hear any message, then I'm going to think, well, how could this be bad for me? Because it's change, and change is bad. We all know that. So, and I think but it's a great example of under communicating, and also not recognizing that that's kind of where we go. It's that fight or flight. And I feel sorry for that guy. You know, he might have been walking around meeting people and went, how come everybody hates me? And it's because, they think he's after my job or doing something. And I think, and the other thing, and I had a supervisor tell me this, they were going through this big change thing. And he said, the mistake we make when we do this is we have been talking about it among ourselves for a couple of months, and they haven't been thinking about it at all.
Yeah.
And we go in all excited and say, this is going to be great. Here's what's going to happen. And we think we're done. And they're just getting the news.
Yeah.
And they're in that surprise, panic, blame piece. And he said, you almost have to sit down with people, at the meeting after the meeting, and go around to people and go, what you hear? How are you doing? What are you thinking? What are you worried about? Which I thought was just, it's time consuming, but then you don't have to circle back and rebuild the trust. And, but I think that's all part of scenario planning too, is how will people react to this?
Yeah, and I think you make a great point. I think, when you discuss this stuff at leadership, as we did extensively about the guy coming, what he's going to, you now know the intricacies of it. And to you, it's a byline. It's like, hey, this guy's coming in, this is what's going to, because we've talked it all through. We know, we know how it's going to work. We've worked it out. But we forget, we've just basically told the punchline of a novel. We've been through all the chapters, right? And gone through it, and we followed the storyline, but nobody else has. And so forget.
And I suspect that in your conversation, some of those same concerns may have come up.
Oh, sure.
And then you talked it through. So you guys did the process, and then you go, ta-da. And that, I think that's a real common thing. And
I agree.
The other thing is, you were talking about scenario planning, that piece where you get here's all the terrible things that could happen. One piece that I think is helpful in that, after you do that, say, now, do you think we've kind of looked at this is everything that's possible? What's probable?
Yeah. Yeah.
And some things are 1 in a million, which are worth thinking about. And that's something Royal Dutch Shell does when they do their disaster planning. They're always, they do it annually, where they think about what's the things that could basically put us out of business.
Yeah.
And they go through that, and then they say, okay, let's put them into possible and probable, because they've been doing it for years. So they're kind of used to going to, listing all that stuff, because a lot of times, and you probably experienced this, when people first go through scenario planning, they kind of block out anything that they think is, well, that's not possible. That would never happen. And it's still worthwhile to say, what if it does?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I found that, you're right. I had to do a lot of prompting of that. But once they got hold on that, the middle piece is the probable, right? So this is possible. Worst scenario. This is where we are. The probable was quite difficult to do once right, because it's like, that's not gonna, the worst that can happen is that I don't want you to go to the worst. There's also other stuff that can happen. To your point, I didn't use the word probable, but I think that is the right word, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think just that's where you get into the nuance of getting your list is a struggle to get people to really, be willing to look at anything that could happen. I saw I sat in, I probably mentioned this before, on a FedEx meeting where they were talking about what could put us out of business.
Mm.
And that was the exercise. They spent all day saying what's going to, and the guy who came up with, I think, the best answer was, if they actually invent that thing in Star Trek where you put something in the transporter, it blinks and then it shows up, said that could put us out of business overnight. But the first half of the day was talking about what UPS might do or what the USPS might do. And finally they busted out of this. It's going to be one of our competitors thinking too. It's not, it's going to be something random, So I think it's a great activity. Especially if it's done when you're not under a lot of stress, because
I agree, totally agree.
But it takes a skilled facilitator, probably with an English accent, to really work them, because you got to sort of grind them in the beginning because they won't go far enough.
Well, it's a combination of
trust. I know him. I'll give him a call. Hang on.
Yeah, I know you know a guy, a chap, one might say.
Absolutely.
A lad.
Yeah. Now that's a really good couple of observations you just made there. I think, by the way, if that was me saying that time capsule, whatever it is what could put us out of business, I think the next thought is, how the fuck do we invent that ourselves?
Yeah, that's it. That's the next step.
Yeah.
In fact, I think Pecos River used to have, buried in, they had a whole bunch of stuff that never got utilized. And I think one of them was an activity around the company that would put you out of business. And the idea was, okay, all of you you all got fired. And your dream is to put the company that fired you out of business. How would you do it? Where would you go? Where's their weaknesses? What would you build today that you wouldn't, that breaks out of the constraints of what you've got? And then at the end, it'd say, okay, now how do we do that first before disgruntled employees or some competitor does it? So it's kind of what you're talking about. It's just it was set up differently.
I think a bomb might be quite effective too, by the way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sometimes that's it. Just blow the place up. That's everyone's dream. But it was fun to watch, because when you gave people a little emotional incentive, like,
that's really
fired,
very interesting.
That's probably everybody's dream, is I'd love to come back and ruin them.
Yeah.
Then you got to say, okay, don't forget we all still work here. So now what do we do? But,
yeah.
Well, one of the things I really like about scenario planning is something you hit on earlier, Peter, is that when people are in fear and they start imagining the worst case scenario or remembering something out of their past, they're all in isolation. And when you bring up scenario planning, they're forced to think together. They're forced to listen to one another. And the more they get used to that, all of a sudden now you've got some real collective innovation going on.
Yeah, it's team building as well, right?
Yeah, it's conversation, and I think, as you said this, Peter, but just talking about it reduces the energy and the fear, because now we've got whiteboards that have all these things. We put it out there. Here it is, and then you can move to, so what do we do if it happens, and what can we do now to keep it from happening? You can kind of get in. Now you've got some power to your thinking brain, as opposed to, the amygdala has stolen the wheel and is racing down the street. But you got to get through. You can't pretend it's not happening.
Right.
You can't pretend people aren't catastrophizing and scared, and all you have to do is go out and collect a few rumors and you'll know there it is. That's what people are thinking about.
I was flabbergasted by the one that I just took you guys through, because it came out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
It was like, what? Where? This is founded on nothing.
That's the
And,
one you know about.
and it's going on all the time. I mean, I sometimes ask, companies says, how's the communication around here? And they all say, well, we could be better. It's this or that. How's the rumor mill? Fabulous. Speed of light.
Oh yeah.
Your announcements I'll bet within 5 minutes after that meeting, the rumors had started. And just like everything, it starts off with, I think they're bringing this guy in, and it ends with, he murdered somebody and he's blackmailing the company, and he's an alien. I mean, it just gets. There's an old story about Citibank. This guy who was in charge of HR and communication decided that they should really bring the rumors to life, and he created. This was early on in the internet, but they had an intranet. They set up the rumor mill, and it was a place where people could report rumors.
Mhm.
And the first day they had 10, and the next day they had over 200. And a week later they had thousands, and it crashed the system. And so they obviously they learned and said, okay, no more rumor mill. We don't want to know. But these rumors were just, it's rife. I mean, it's what we do when we're under stress, we try and, as Dr. Wu would tell us, we alleviate that stress by telling someone a terrible thing that might happen, and then we feel better. And then they feel worse.
And we invent shit, so
We make stuff up all the time.
And some of it is to justify something we've done, which we know was wrong.
Yeah, well, a lot of times too, like in your scenario, there may be people who are trying to build a case.
Yeah.
That they feel like they don't like things, or they think something, and then everything that happens, they go, see, I knew it. They're bringing this guy in, and they're just building a case. And the danger is that they start to gather disciples.
Right.
And you guys are thinking, this is great. People are going to be thrilled that we have a customer service, but this is great for the business. And they're all going, plotting in the other room that these guys are out to ruin us.
Right.
Yeah, he's already derailed.
And, I think a great example of that is AI. Because the people who are investigating, looking at it, going, this is going to be great. And everybody else is going, it's aimed right at my nose. They're going to take my job. I don't know how, but AI is going to take my job.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Conversation Street. For more information or to schedule a private conversation with Success Authorities, email us at inquire@successauthorities.com.